Imagine this. You walk into a royal palace, and from the first step, you're hit by not music, not luxury, not the scent of flowers, but a rotten, sickening smell. A smell that brings tears to your eyes and makes your legs want to turn back. That was the smell of the woman on whom the fate of France depended. This is not a figment of the imagination of her enemies, nor is it a malicious legend. This is the true story of a queen whose influence extended over entire dynasties and whose stench permeated the entire court. This woman ruled with an iron fist, plotted conspiracies, eliminated rivals, and formed deadly alliances. But behind her back, people whispered not only about her power, they whispered about her smell, acrid, persistent, permeating the walls. At court, people tried not to wrinkle their noses, suffocating under layers of incense, rose water, and musk that flooded every corridor. And she, Catherine de Medici, knew all this, and yet she changed nothing. And you ask yourself, how? How could it happen that a queen, one of the most powerful women in Europe, completely abandoned hygiene? Why did she allow her own body to be repulsive? The answer is not so simple. It was not a matter of laziness or indifference. Fears, dogmas, ancient beliefs, and even medical prescriptions were involved. At that time, it was believed that water opened the pores to evil spirits, that a clean body got sick faster, and that soap was worse than perfume. Even royal doctors advised avoiding water and relying on fragrances. In the 16th century, this was considered not only the norm, but also prudence. Now tell me, have you ever heard of a queen who ruled the country from behind the scenes, through wars, intrigues, mass murders, and at the same time, stank scandalously? No? Then stay, because you are about to learn a story of power, fear, tragedy, and the stench of decay that accompanied her throughout her life. Catherine was not born in France. She spent her childhood in Florence, in the heart of the Renaissance, in the legendary Medici family, bankers, patrons of the arts, and puppeteers of European politics. She was surrounded by astrologers, artists, alchemists, and schemers. Her uncle was Pope Clement VII. Her fate was sealed. She would not be an ordinary woman. At the age of 14, she was sent to France to marry the Dauphin, Henri of Orléans, the future Henry II. The French court greeted her with coldness. An Italian, with an accent, a thin voice, and a strange appearance. Who would want her? She was ridiculed. She was not loved. Her husband openly preferred his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, and from the very beginning there was a slight, strange smell in the air coming from the young princess, a smell that became unbearable over time. But Catherine was no soft doll. She was the daughter of Florence. She was born not for beauty, but for power. From childhood, she was taught to observe, listen, and manipulate. And she understood the most important thing. Love is not important. Power was important. And power was information. Catherine became an invisible shadow. She studied the habits of the courtiers, memorized who was friends with whom and who was enemies with whom. She did not yet have power, but she was already preparing for the moment when she would take it into her own hands. And while she was making her plans, strange changes were taking place within her. Her body, her breath, her clothes. Everything began to exude a heavy, spicy, suffocating scent. Her skin was constantly moist, her perfume had soaked into her clothes, and she never drank a drop of water. In those days, bathing was considered harmful. Noble ladies washed only once a year, if that. Even hot springs were used as a therapeutic treatment rather than a means of hygiene. But Catherine went further. She didn't even wash her hands. Her underwear was made of fabrics soaked in musk and ambergris. Her dresses were heavy, multi-layered, and richly decorated with embroidery, literally saturated with sweat, fat, and food residues. Her shoes were velvet slippers that were practically never aired. Her entire body became like a closed vessel in which odors accumulated. The smell of royal power mixed with decay. Incidentally, one interesting fact: in that era, it was believed that fragrances could protect against the plague. So-called vinegar sponges and aromatic apples were sold all over Paris. Balls soaked in essential oils that were worn near the face to prevent the inhalation of bad air. Perhaps Catherine truly believed that scents could save not only from disease, but also from death. And that was only the beginning of her story. The servants who attended the queen in the evenings tried not to breathe. They held their breath, averted their eyes, and pressed their lips together. The atmosphere around Catherine was thick and dense, like fog filled with smells. A heavy, suffocating scent always surrounded her. And this is not speculation. Foreign ambassadors wrote about it in private letters. One Spanish diplomat complained, "Her Majesty has a sharp mind, but her physical presence is painful." He, like many others, could hardly bear to be near her. But despite this foul aura, Catherine de Medici became one of the most powerful women in 16th century Europe. She ruled France for decades, first as queen consort, then as regent for her young sons, and ultimately as the de facto ruler of the crown. Her smell did not stand in her way. On the contrary, it became part of her legend, another tool of pressure and fear. It was a kind of sign: I am above human weaknesses. I am power itself. The older Catherine became, the stronger her habits grew. She ordered the creation of personal perfume laboratories in the Louvre, where her alchemists developed individual blends based on musk, sandalwood, ambergris, resins, and even civetine, a substance extracted from the glands of a marten. These perfumes were so powerful that some courtiers fainted upon entering her chambers. Curtains, bed linen, clothes, even gloves. Everything was impregnated with this scent, which could no longer be separated from the queen herself. But behind the perfume lay another fear. Catherine was sincerely convinced that water was dangerous. It weakened the skin and opened the way to disease and evil. Therefore, she did not bathe. She only wiped her face and armpits with cloths soaked in rose water. She did not allow wet fabric to touch her body. Better to drown in her own sweat than risk a fever. As a result, her body exuded a complex, frightening bouquet: rancid perfume, sweat, grease, blood, dead skin. And she was not ashamed of it. On the contrary, she believed that her smell was the embodiment of her power. Since her youth, Catherine had been drawn to the occult sciences: alchemists, astrologers, doctors. She was surrounded by those who stood on the border between knowledge and superstition. Her childhood was spent among vials of poison, star charts, and predictions, and when she became Queen of France, she brought this world with her and rooted it in the palace. She set up secret laboratories under the Louvre. She ordered ingredients from India, Persia, and Morocco. She maintained contact with people who were later tried for heresy. She had her own astrologer, Nostradamus himself. Catherine firmly believed that the fate of her children and of all France was written in the heavens and could be changed through rituals, spells, and sacrifices. Of course, rumors spread. They said that the queen participated in black masses, that her chambers were dark halls covered with occult symbols, that she sacrificed animals, made magical potions from blood, and used poisons. Some trembled before her, others groveled in the hope of gaining a drop of her favor, but the rumors were backed up by facts. Catherine did indeed own a collection of grimoires, ancient books on witchcraft. She wore amulets made of bones and ordered perfumed gloves with a mysterious composition. One of these pairs of gloves went down in history. According to Catherine's enemies, it was given to the Duke of Guise, a sworn enemy of the crown. He soon died, slowly, in agony, and for no apparent reason. Many were convinced that this was not a coincidence, but a carefully planned ritual. By the way, it is important to know that during Catherine's time, poisoning through fabric was indeed widespread. There were recipes in which poisons were mixed with fats and rubbed into gloves or linings. When it came into contact with the skin, the poison slowly entered the bloodstream. Catherine may not have just known about this. She may have been a master of this art. After the mysterious death of the Duke of Guise, who'd been given gloves from the Queen as a gift, no one dared to talk about coincidences anymore, especially at the Medici court, where such coincidences occurred with frightening regularity. Thus was born the myth of a body that was not cleansed or sanctified by water, as if protecting itself from evil from outside, because that body itself already carried evil within. During the most brutal religious wars in France, Catherine became the de facto ruler. Her sons, weak, sickly, and timid, wore crowns but had no power. The power belonged to her. And as they whispered at court, not only power, her scent became a sign of her omnipresence. Everyone in the castle knew that when the air grew heavy and stifling, the Queen was approaching. There was no need to announce her arrival. She had already entered before she set foot in the room. And yet, almost no one dared to criticize her openly. The nobles, superstitious and intimidated, feared not only her political power, but also her supposed magical powers. They whispered in secluded corners, behind tightly closed doors. But foreign ambassadors were not silent. One Spaniard wrote to Madrid, "The stench of the Queen Mother is unbearable." Another, from the Holy Roman Empire, reported, "After her visit, the hall had to be sprinkled with vinegar and lavender." Some courtiers complained of migraines after receptions. Others claimed that Catherine's perfumes were so strong that they burned their throats. And yet no one dared to contradict her, because to challenge her meant more than just entering into conflict. It meant fighting death itself, which lurked behind her perfumes, ambergris and musk. But it was not just witchcraft and superstition. Over the years, her body had indeed deteriorated. Pain in her legs, constant inflammation, severe stomach ailments. All this intensified the already terrible smell. Her skin, dried out from never being washed, flaked and exuded a sour odor. Her mouth, full of rotten teeth, emitted a stench that made people recoil. Her underwear was changed extremely rarely. It seemed to ferment right on her, turning into a cocoon of sweat, blood, and decay. But Ekaterina did not hide. She turned her smell into a weapon. Perfumes were not adornments for her, but armor. Fragrance was her second face, her shield, her threat. She did not play at tenderness. She went into battle in silks soaked in resin and sweat. The irony was that Catherine adored flowers. She ordered the rarest varieties from Turkey, Persia, and Morocco. Black roses, yellow jasmine, purple lilies. She had secret gardens near her palaces where she could walk alone for hours, surrounded by fragrances, leaving behind a trail that reminded her not of spring, but of death. Her political power reached its peak during one of the bloodiest moments in French history, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. On orders attributed to Catherine herself, thousands of Protestants were killed in Paris in a single night. Formally, the decree was signed by her son, Charles IX, but all of Europe knew that she was behind it. According to contemporary accounts, the Queen walked through the streets littered with bodies without the slightest remorse, inhaling the scent of roses while the city drowned in blood. It was then that her final image was born. The witch, the widow of France, the mother of cursed kings, a woman who did not cry, pray, or wash. She was hated, feared, and cursed. She was considered a curse on the throne, but her supporters knew and appreciated her for exactly that, because her impurity concealed power. Catherine understood better than anyone else that power does not have to be liked. It must inspire fear. And while her enemies died, one after another, she remained alive. Her body, however, was failing her. The court doctors hardly dared to touch her. The maids slept with handkerchiefs soaked in perfume over their faces. Priests confessed her from a respectful distance. In the last stages of her life, Catherine de Medici hardly ever left her room, which was littered with bottles, candles, amulets, dusty manuscripts, and flasks. Her private chambers had turned into a temple of smells, a temple of decay, anguish, and old age. The aroma of resin, rancid perfume, mold, and disease mingled here. But even in this atmosphere of decay, she continued to rule, and this frightened everyone the most. Her body was already falling apart, but her will remained unbreakable. She was more like a statue, cold, cracked, but unbroken. And yet the worst was yet to come for Catherine. Because when a woman of her stature falls, she does not fall alone. She takes an era with her. She takes her family with her. She takes her country with her. She was a living symbol of absolute power, and this symbol began to decay long before her death. The physical deterioration was slow but steady. Every day brought a new symptom, a new pain. Deep ulcers opened in her groin. Abscesses festered on her back. Stomach ulcers caused constant nausea, and uncontrollable incontinence turned her body into a constant source of odor. A body once full of energy and cunning now had enough strength only to exist. Catherine, mother of France, smelled of a mixture of urine, pus, wilted jasmine, and musk. Her clothes, increasingly heavy and thick, no longer served as adornment. They hid her decay. But the queen's gaze remained the same, sharp, burning, piercing. Those who looked into her eyes assured that a flame still burned inside her, a flame that feared neither age nor death. But outside the castle walls, the people no longer feared her. They hated her. They called her the stinking queen, the mother of the plague, the witch of Florence. Pamphlets and caricatures circulated in the streets, depicting Catherine sitting on a throne of skulls, surrounded by snakes and frogs. She became the embodiment of everything that was rotten in the French monarchy. Protestants accused her of corrupting the throne, of witchcraft, and of destroying the state. And yet, despite the popular hatred, no one could deny her importance. It was Catherine who kept the country on the brink of civil war. She was the architect of dozens of alliances, agreements, and secret treaties. She played on fears, manipulated vulnerabilities, and arranged people like pieces on a board. But she paid a terrible price for this game, with a body that betrayed her and a soul that suffocated from the secrets she had accumulated. By her final years, Catherine could no longer walk. She was carried around in a chair wrapped in fragrant fabrics and cloaks soaked in rose oil and myrrh. The walls of her bedroom were covered with dried herbs. Water dripped from the ceiling in an attempt to purify the air, but nothing helped. The smell did not come from her clothes or the room. It rose from within, from the very core of her being. The royal doctors could offer nothing but loud diagnoses: gangrene, dropsy, nephritis, colitis. But the truth was terrible and simple. Catherine was rotting alive, not from one disease, but from dozens. Her body had become a prison from which there was no escape, and that body was a reflection of her soul, broken, exhausted, imprisoned in suffering. In her final months, she began to talk to herself. The maids who stood guard at her door heard quiet whispers at night. Catherine prayed, cried, and sometimes laughed. Her voice was strained and broken, but alive. It was as if she was talking to her deceased children, to her dead husband, to shadows from the past. By the way, an important detail. After Catherine's death, her black chest was indeed found in the palace, with grimoires, astrological charts, letters to Nostradamus, and unknown amulets. This chest became a real sensation at court and reinforced the legend of her as a witch queen. Thus ended the life of a woman whose power did not need love, only fear. Catherine de Medici left France not only a political legacy, but also a scent that lingered over the country for a long time. The scent of power, the scent of blood, and the scent of a woman who refused to wash away her sins. From childhood, Catherine seemed to be followed by a shadow, death. But this was no ordinary death. Catherine had studied it for decades. She summoned it in rituals and asked astrologers about the date of her demise. And now, in her final days, she seemed to welcome it. "You've come," she whispered at night. "But I'm not afraid of you. I'm already part of you." As her body finally broke down, her power crumbled. The nobility began to whisper. Diplomats averted their eyes, and enemies lay in wait. But even lying in bed, surrounded by the smell of incense and decay, Catherine continued to rule. She arranged marriages, executions, and alliances. Her words still sounded like a sentence. She had become a fated goddess, but a goddess nonetheless. Her son, Henry III, was weak and surrounded by enemies. France was torn apart by civil wars, and the Catholic faith was crumbling under the pressure of reformers. But Catherine did not give up. Even from her bed, even on the brink of death, she dictated letters, banned ceremonies, organized conspiracies, executed conspirators, and watched her enemies' every move. Her young advisors did not know what to feel, horror or pity. Some left her presence barely able to contain their nausea, others in tears. But they all understood. Power was still there. It was between the bloodstains on her hem and the legendary stench that made the court shudder. And so, on the morning of January 5th, 1589, Catherine de Medici closed her eyes, without a word, without a cry, just silence. Silence in which death had lived for decades. She left as she had lived, in a cloud of mystery, amid whispers, aromas, and horror. Her body was placed in an airtight coffin, wrapped in fragrant fabrics and poured over with vinegar, but even that did not save her. During the transport to Blois, the horses shuddered, the soldiers held their noses, and the priests lost their balance from the stench. It seemed that her smell would live longer than her body. But that was only the beginning. The real nightmare came later. During the French Revolution, her grave was desecrated. An angry mob, hating everything royal, pulled the coffin out of the ground. Her bones, still smelling of perfumes, resins, and death, were thrown into a common grave. There, in the damp earth, Catherine de Medici was forever mixed with the remains of beggars, criminals, and victims of epidemics. Thus ended the woman who had ruled France with an iron fist for half a century. No baths, no crown, no grave, only ashes and bones and a smell. But her story did not disappear with her body. The legend remained, even stronger than during her lifetime, because her name continued to be spoken, with horror, with admiration, with disgust. And one question always remained: where did that smell really come from? Was it a disease, a curse, or a sign? Modern research offers different versions. Perhaps it was something more than just a lack of hygiene. Catherine lived in an era when cleanliness was considered dangerous. Frequent bathing was believed to cause disease, especially among the nobility. The pores would open, and infection would enter the body. Therefore, perfume was not a whim, but a necessity. The aristocracy lived under a veil of perfume and silk. But Catherine's smell was different. It penetrated fabrics and clung to walls. It didn't just mask other smells, it dominated them. Some scientists suggest that such a powerful stench could have been caused by rare skin infections, metabolic disorders, chronic inflammation, and tissue necrosis. Perhaps she had trimethylaminuria, a rare genetic syndrome in which the body emits the smell of rotting fish, or a complex of diseases, each overlapping the other. Or maybe this smell was not only medical, but symbolic. It became a metaphor for power that refuses to be pure, a metaphor for a woman who made horror her crown. Catherine de Medici did not strive to be a saint. She wanted to be strong, and she succeeded, because even the smell of death could not make France forget her. Some scientists suggest that Catherine's terrible smell may have been the result of a chronic infection, possibly gangrene or bacterial inflammation, slowly eating away at her tissues from within. In those days, there were no antibiotics, no reliable methods of fighting infection, and once the body began to rot, the process was irreversible. Doctors tried to treat her with remedies that seem wild today: leeches to balance the fluids, ointments made from poisonous plants, and powders from the East. Perhaps it was these medicines that accelerated her decay. Add to this her daily diet, rich in spices, red meat, and fatty foods. All of this also affected her body odor. But Catherine did not give up such excesses, nor did she give up power. She clung to it until her last breath. However, Catherine's story is no longer just a question of medicine or smell. It is a symbol. It is a metaphor for power mired in decay. The woman who held France on the brink of chaos, who survived wars, conspiracies, and the deaths of her children, became a reflection of decay herself. Her body, covered in sores, saturated with perfume and pain, became a symbol of a decaying monarchy. At that time, France was experiencing not only a physical plague, but also a political one. People's faith in the crown was melting away. Morals were disintegrating, and Catherine, with her foul-smelling body hidden under fragrant fabrics, became a visible image of this disease. Her stench was not just the result of her illness. It was a reproach, a warning, a picture of what absolute power turns into when it lasts too long. A body that refused to be washed, that was covered with musk to hide the rot, was a body bearing the mark of sin, guilt, and abuse. It was a living ghost in a crown, the embodiment of a cruel truth. Power disfigures. Power cripples. But Catherine is not just a monster. Her story raises another important theme: loneliness, the loneliness of power. No one shared her burden. She made all the decisions: who to marry, who to execute, who to betray, all by herself. She saved the country, losing her sons. She pretended to be in control when everything was falling apart, and this burden also left its mark on her body: pain, exhaustion, decay. In her final years, she was completely alone. Her servants were afraid to come near her. Her sons were not there. Her husband was in his grave. The kingdom was in flames, and she was in bed fighting a formless horror, fighting a smell that seemed like a curse. Catherine's story reminds us that great figures are not just portraits in gold. They are people, with bodies, with flesh, with pain. They suffer. They try to hold on to the throne and die like everyone else. Neither a crown nor power can save them from aging, illness, decay. And then the question arises: what remains when glory, pomp, and splendor disappear? What remains when the crown falls and the body decays? Catherine de Medici showed us. The truth remains, raw, cruel, and alive. And yet, despite everything, the stench, the fear, the loneliness, her legacy cannot be erased. Catherine was one of the most influential women of her time. She changed France. She led her country through hell. She left her mark on politics, culture, and religion. Thanks to her, the ideas of the Renaissance penetrated the heart of Paris. Thanks to her, France did not fall apart. But her legacy is ambiguous. She was a mother and a manipulator. She was the throne's support and its ulcer. She was a symbol of power and a symbol of downfall, and perhaps this is where her true glory lies. She did not hide her darkness. She became its face. She was a woman who went beyond the boundaries of her era, but she paid dearly for this step. Catherine remains a mystery because she was a mixture of extremes, greatness and downfall, light and darkness, life and death. She was not just a queen who ruled a country. She was a queen who controlled the very mystery of her own destruction. And therein lies the main power of her image. The story of Catherine de Medici makes us think about the price of power and the fragility of the human being behind the mask of a monarch. It reminds us that beneath the gilded crown lies mortal flesh, and sometimes the smell of truth is far more terrifying than death. But against the backdrop of all this decay and tragedy, we must not forget that Catherine left behind a huge legacy. Her death was not just the end of a life, it was a collapse. France lost more than just a queen. It lost a symbol that, despite everything, held the country together during its darkest hours. Her reign coincided with years of civil war, when Catholics and Protestants slaughtered each other with terrifying cruelty, and despite all her flaws, it was Catherine who tried to maintain balance, sometimes through diplomacy, sometimes through force, sometimes through sheer fear. But she tried, because she knew that if she loosened her grip, everything would collapse. This struggle wore her body down and destroyed her authority. After her death, chaos ensued. Her son, Henry III, inherited the throne, but not his mother's strength. He was unable to stop the bloody avalanche. France plunged into a new cycle of hell, the War of the Three Henrys, one of the bloodiest episodes of religious conflict. Even after her death, Catherine continued to influence the fate of Europe through the marriages she arranged for her children. These unions were not mere dynastic formalities. They were political time bombs. For example, the marriage of her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, to Henry of Navarre was supposed to reconcile Catholics and Huguenots, but it led to the exact opposite. It became the spark that ignited the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, a mass murder of Protestants in Paris. The wedding that was supposed to be a symbol of unity turned into a bloody massacre. And although Catherine did not formally wield a sword, no one doubted that without her will, nothing would have happened. Historians still argue about who this woman was. Was she a mother who tried with all her might to protect her children? Or was she a cold manipulator who knew no mercy? Some see her as a victim of her time. Others see her as its executioner. But no researcher can dispute the obvious. She was exceptional and terrifying. Her personal tragedy also played a role. Catherine buried several of her children. This not only broke her as a mother, it made her even tougher. Her decisions became increasingly ruthless. She could not afford to show weakness. Power does not forgive. Her body, covered in sores and reeking of death, became a mirror. France was rotting from within. The country she tried to hold together was like her, beautiful on the outside, decaying on the inside. After her death, a vacuum reigned. Who would now hold the reins? Who could unite what Catherine had struggled to hold together for decades? The crown that had shone during the Renaissance began to fade. And it faded not from time, but from blood, from hatred, from the rift between people. But even through this darkness, light shone through. Catherine was a patron of the arts. She supported architects, artists, and scientists. Thanks to her, Italy came to Paris. With its fashion, gastronomy, and music, her influence was felt in the halls of palaces, in the decor, and in the culture. She instilled a taste for refinement in France. And this but hangs over every portrait, every hall, every rose grown in her gardens. Her light cannot be separated from her darkness, and the brighter her cultural legacy, the clearer the sound of rotting flesh under her cloak. The air in her chambers was always thick, saturated with perfume, sweat, decay, and fear. The maids changed daily. Those who stayed did so not out of duty, but out of inertia, as if they were afraid that if they left Catherine, something worse than this smell would happen to them. And yet, even in complete physical degradation, even in a cloud of disgust, Catherine retained that incomprehensible power that allowed her to be, and remain, the center of the court. Her face was thinning, her voice was trembling, her body was refusing to serve her. But with a single glance, the courtiers fell silent. With a single phrase, they agreed. Even in death, she ruled. Her image became almost mythical, a shadow of the past brought to life in the present. The woman who once held the fate of France in her fist was now a prisoner of her own body. She was no longer the mistress of the palace, she was a captive within it. But neither suffering nor the smell nor loneliness broke her spirit. Her scent became a curse and a symbol of power that cannot be shaken off. It was a reminder that power leaves a mark, and that mark does not always smell like roses. Sometimes it stinks so badly that it reeks through the centuries. Because Catherine was not just a woman, not just a queen. She was the image of an era where power cost health, an era where every gesture could be fatal, where even the monarch's breath was poisoned, literally and figuratively. Under her, France was a state teetering on the brink, between light and darkness, between rebirth and degradation, between Catholicism and Protestantism, between life and slaughter. Catherine maneuvered along this edge with the skill of a surgeon, and as long as she could, she maintained the balance. But illness destroyed everything. First her body, then trust, then the entire structure she had built with such persistence. And yet, can we say that she lost? Her name lives on. Her image is in textbooks, in films, in memory. She is part of the legend of France. Not a saintly image, not a romantic symbol, but a dark, yet real force. She whose body became a metaphor for political collapse. She whose stench became the smell of an era. The story of Catherine de Medici does not lend itself to easy conclusions. She is not a hero, nor is she a villain. She is a human being, with passions, with ambitions, with mistakes, with a body that rotted and a spirit that never gave up. She is a reminder that power destroys, and history does not forgive. And perhaps that is why she deserves to be remembered forever, not because of her crown, not because of her blood, but because of the smell of truth that cannot be hidden under silk, ambergris, and musk. This is not the end. This is a mark, and it will remain. Despite their loyalty, even her closest servants tried to keep their distance, not only because of the stench, but also because of the mournful, suffocating silence that surrounded the queen. Her children, though concerned, were far away. Each was caught up in their own struggle for survival and power. Catherine's death was not quick, and it was certainly not dignified. It was a painful agony in which her body gradually decayed and her mind wavered between lucidity and delirium. The smell that had become her constant companion was not just a nuisance. It was a physical manifestation of the destruction that was inexorably consuming her. But beyond this personal tragedy, the figure of Catherine de Medici reveals a much harsher truth. Power is not eternal. It destroys. It reduces a person to their bones. And in the end, everyone, even those who wore a crown, is left alone with the fragility of their own body. Her legacy, tainted by intrigue and bloody decisions, is not just a chronicle of decline. It is also an important testimony to the complexity of female power in a world created and controlled by men. Catherine broke the rules. She ruled with her mind and determination, and she paid for it with pain, loneliness, and contempt. The story of her foul-smelling body is not just a grim tale. It is a window into the human soul. The stench is not only the result of decay, but also a symbol of all the compromises, fears, and decisions that had to be made to stay at the top. It is a reminder that history remembers not only the deeds of its heroes, but also their weaknesses, their fears, their physical reality. In the end, Catherine becomes the embodiment of the dark side of power: loneliness, disease, decay, inevitable death. Her image is not a lavish portrait with a crown, but a dull, emaciated silhouette behind curtains filled with incense. Because even fame and greatness cannot erase the fact that we are all mortal. France was already preparing to enter a new era. Its foundations were crumbling, and the political and social landscape was changing. But the memory of Catherine remained, as a warning, as a signal of what absolute power leads to, and how dangerous it is to try to hold on to the throne at any cost. So the queen who never washed went down in history as a symbol, not of power, but of its human, vulnerable, painful side, a story that still speaks to us today, through the centuries, through scent, through fear. Catherine de Medici's legacy extends far beyond her lifetime. Her influence can still be felt in European history and culture, but her personal journey also remains a mirror reflecting all the internal contradictions of female power in that era. A woman in her position had to be strong but not provocative, wise but not domineering, perfect, with no right to weakness. The Renaissance was a time of discovery, science, and art. At that time, the figure of the queen had symbolic meaning: order, divine stability, the continuation of the dynasty. But Catherine destroyed this image with her life, her sickly body, her smell, her penchant for intrigue. All this ran counter to the image of the ideal monarch. She exposed the reality. She showed that behind the golden facade was a human being, broken, tired, dying. The contrast between her grandeur and fragility served as a reminder. A public mask does not cancel out personal nightmares. The crown does not save you from fear. Even a queen cannot escape loneliness, illness, and death. In this sense, Catherine is a timeless figure. Her decisions are still controversial today. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre is one of the darkest moments in her biography. Allowing or permitting the massacre of thousands of people in the hope of peace was a fatal mistake. Instead of reconciliation, it gave rise to even greater hatred. But it was a desperate move, an attempt to hold on to power, to glue together a divided country at any cost. She was one of the first to realize that there is no black and white in politics. There is only a price, and those who pay it until their last breath. Her influence was not limited to palace intrigues. Catherine de Medici introduced Italian cuisine to France, changing the tastes of the nobility and leaving a cultural mark that can still be felt today. Filled pies, exquisite desserts, refined vegetable and meat dishes, all this came with her chefs. But her contribution went further: fashion, art, architecture. She became a conduit for the Renaissance, proving that her power extended not only to politics, but also to the essence of French everyday life. However, the most powerful and contradictory figure remains that of the Queen, who, despite her absolute power, found herself a prisoner of her own body and destiny. Her stench became a symbol of decay, disintegration, and what was happening to her, and to France, at the same time. It was not just the smell of disease, it was the smell of inevitability. Over time, she found herself isolated. Those who had once worshipped her began to distance themselves, not only because of the stench, but because of the fear of what she represented. Her figure became inconvenient. People tried not to talk about her. Her body was a secret that the court preferred to forget. This is how not just people disappear. This is how eras disappear. Catherine's story is also about the limits of power, about how the concentration of power in one person's hands can destroy not only kingdoms, but also those who wield that power. Her life is a lesson about the price paid for ambition, for control, for sacrifice, and about the fragility that cannot be hidden under robes or masks. The contrast between her youth, a cheerful Italian noblewoman who came to France with hope and grace, and her end, filled with suffering, stench, and loneliness, cannot fail to shock. Her path is a road from hope to harsh necessity, from an open face to a mask. She lost many children, and that could not help but have an impact. Each death made her tougher, more closed off, more cautious. Her motherhood was not affection, but strategy. She built a dynasty at the cost of her own soul. And this dynasty, raised under her strict supervision, became part of European history. Catherine did not simply shape characters. She shaped future rulers. She instilled in them her own understanding of power, its price, its dangers, even if it meant denying them love. Over the years, Catherine's perception changed. She was called a witch, a poisoner, a monster. But later, a woman ahead of her time, a brilliant political figure, the embodiment of fortitude. This duality only adds to the interest. She was never one-dimensional. And perhaps that is why her story lives on. She shows what a woman's path to power can be in a world where that power is denied. She reminds us that the price of power is not only the crown, but also loneliness, not only glory, but also guilt. Catherine is an archetype, a woman who held the world in the balance, but who was as vulnerable as the rest of us. Her story does not end with her death. It continues in books, in research, in questions about morality, about strength, about humanity, about how far you can go before the collapse begins, not from the outside, but from within. Catherine's end is not just the tragic outcome of one destiny. It is the end of an entire era. France was on the verge of change. The old world was crumbling. The Queen's stinking, dying body became a grim symbol. Everything that had seemed so unbreakable for so long had finally succumbed to the weight of time. But despite everything, Catherine changed the country. She survived death and remained in memory. Not as a saint, not a puppet, but real, just as real history should be. Catherine de Medici was not just a foul-smelling queen, not just a sickly shadow of a dying monarchy. She was a link in the chain of European history, a link that connected power and fear, duty and sacrifice, change and resistance. Her story is not about a woman who was rejected because of her smell. It is a story about how one person tried to maintain a balance between the old and the new, between the interests of her family and the future of the state, between the facade of power and her own vulnerability. Every decision she made, every public gesture, was part of a complex game in which she remained a woman but had to act as a ruler. And in this fragile balance, there was not only ambition, but also fear, guilt, and loneliness. Her smell was not just the result of illness. It was a symbol of how power wears you down, how the body and soul crack beneath it, how the crown becomes too heavy to bear over time. That is why Catherine's figure has not disappeared. Centuries have passed, and her name continues to spark debate, attract attention, and inspire reflection, because she embodies the whole person endowed with power, all of our contradictory nature, strength and weakness, pride and suffering. Her image is a lesson that cannot be dismissed. In the public imagination, Catherine remains shrouded in darkness. Some admire her intelligence, fortitude, and strategy. Some condemn her for her cruelty and indifference to the pain of others, but neither view makes her one-dimensional. Because her story stubbornly resists simplification, it shows that true power is always a mixture of genius and destruction, always a tragedy. This story is not just a biography, it is a mirror. In it, we see not so much the distant France of the 16th century as ourselves, our fears, our ambitions, our need for recognition, and that inevitable weakness that sooner or later overtakes everyone who thinks they are in control. The story of Catherine de Medici is the story of a human being in its most naked form, a struggle for survival, a desire to leave a mark, and in the end, the need to accept one's own mortality. Her life, full of triumphs and disasters, helps us understand that the path to the top almost always leads through pain, and that the higher you climb, the harder you fall. That is why her end is not a full stop. It is a symbol of power that smells not of roses, but of blood and fear. A symbol of greatness that does not save from decay. A symbol of a person who, despite having everything, never escaped loneliness and pain. The queen who didn't wash. She is still contemptuously called that. But there is much more behind this label. It is the eternal image of power that cannot be completely rejected or completely accepted. The image of strength that becomes a burden over time. And the image of a person who, despite everything, remained a part of history forever.